Episode 2 of Eyes on Liberty features Joe Consorti, analyst for the Bitcoin Layer and advisor for Theya. Now, watching brilliance from afar for years on Twitter is one thing, but having this interaction with Joe for me was inspirational. Topics include work ethic, biblical principles, sports, clothing, running a business, a philosophy to make the world a better place in general. This is one episode you really don't want to miss. He's a brilliant guy, and it's a unique opportunity to hear from him and about him. Enjoy the show.
You find those who have not had freedom and not in a position to define freedom, they're beginning to define it for themselves now. And as they get in a position intellectually to define freedom for themselves, they see that they don't have it. And it makes them less peaceful.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice.
Monetary debasement is out of control. Runaway debt like an animated snowball. The only question is, do you want to take the steps to get out of the way? Or do you become a casualty to parasitic greed? Hey, Joe. Hey, thanks for coming on the show. For the audience, this is Joe Consorti, and I just got to say, I'm surprised by how short your resume is. And at first I thought it was disappointing. And then I realized how young you are. You just graduated from high school, not college, high school 5 years ago, right before the world went off on the deep end. Why don't you give the audience a breakdown, a short bio of your career and from 2019 to the present day?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to chat. Yeah, so from 2019 on, it's been a bit of a wild ride, obviously. So I graduated in May of 2019, and then I went to the University of Vermont, originally studying biology. I was on the pre-med track. It's what I wanted to do for most of my life. But I decided to switch into business, not for finance reasons, but because I really like talking. And I figured that talking for a living, I'd find my way much easier in business than in medicine. And so I switched into business. I quickly found my footing in the finance world. I quickly took up a major in finance. And they had free Bloomberg terminals that were provided to students at UVM. So I really quickly grabbed one of those, spent a lot of the time in the library cruising that instead of going to parties and what have you. My routine was essentially going to class, going to the gym, eating as much for free in the cafeteria as I could, and then going to play around with the Bloomberg terminal with whatever free time I had after all my homework and essays and things like that. So that's what I did in the fall of 2019, my first semester at UVM. And then we go home for the holiday season, the Christmas season. We come back, and I was only about a month and some change into the spring semester when we went home for spring break. And then they locked everything down for COVID while we were away. And so we weren't allowed to go back to the dorms. All I had was my overnight bag. We weren't allowed to go back to grab our clothes or thank goodness I brought my computer, but we weren't allowed to go back and grab anything. And so really all I had with me was my Bloomberg terminal, my computer, and my change of clothes. So not very fun, but it really, that moment and what happened there and what the government did really kind of made me skeptical and jaded toward higher authority. And it all worked out very well, because at the same time that I was doing that, I was studying financial markets. I wasn't particularly interested in Bitcoin at that point, or rather I hadn't really learned too much about it. You had heard about it, but I hadn't learned about it. Fast forward to that summer and my free time, obviously being home rather than being away, I had plenty of time to spare. And so I started a small general contracting business, hired my friends. We painted houses for the summer. I was able to generate just over $100,000 in revenue at a 25% margin over there. And so I had a lot of capital to deploy for a 19-year-old at the time. And I didn't know any asset to deploy it into. really. Obviously, I'd been studying financial markets up to that point, but really I didn't feel, I was looking more at like a balanced portfolio, right? Getting stocks, getting bonds. I didn't have a job, so I didn't have a 401k to begin contributing to. And so right around that time, my friend Tyler LaRoche, who works at BTC Inc., he had started working at BTC Inc. During that period that I was running this painting company. He put me onto Bitcoin. He introduced me to it, and he told me to read 2 books. He told me to read The Masters and Slaves of Money by Robert Breedlove and The Bullish Case for Bitcoin by Vijay Boyapati. I read both of those things. I was instantly hooked because it was this monetary tool that aligned with the way that I had been thinking for the 6-7 months leading into when I had first learned about it, right? I had learned about it September, October timeframe. I put a great deal of what I had earned that summer into Bitcoin right around when we were at, $8,000 or $9,000. Lo and behold, that proved to be a pretty good investment. We went on that bull run, and obviously getting into it for money number to go up, but more so than anything, off the back of that, learning what I had learned throughout that year about the way that government treats people, it kind of completely shifted my political affiliation. I was very much apolitical. I became very much kind of a libertarian following what had happened that year, right? Small government, less intervention in our lives. Bitcoin lined up very nicely with that. And so as I was doing this, obviously I was still studying financial markets. I was still studying, markets generally. And then I started folding Bitcoin into my investment framework and my analysis framework. I began looking to people like Dylan LeClaire, who also went to the school that I went to. And so, he had kind of made his name, or began making his name, by posting his analysis on Twitter and doing kind of this new form of markets analysis called on-chain analysis, analyzing buyer behavior on Bitcoin's blockchain.
Time out. You're trying to tell me you and Dylan LeClaire both went to the University of Vermont?
Yeah, the same school.
One day they're gonna have how they do with sports. It's like, oh, these 2 guys went to the same university, and they're gonna 20 years from now. I wouldn't be surprised if they have like a wall of fame for gurus like you guys. That's shocking. I was surprised. Did you know him when you were going to school there? Are you guys similar age?
Same age, same grade. Tyler and I were a mutual friend, so I didn't know him. But Tyler and I put us together kind of after that, right? So we had a mutual friend in Tyler. I sat with Tyler in all my classes. I don't think I had any classes with Dylan, but he dropped out right then and there after they sent us home for COVID. He dropped out. I didn't. I stuck with it. I'm glad that I did. I was able to accelerate my course load and graduate about a semester and a half early, almost a year early. So I'm happy that I did. I got my degree. But at the same time, I realized that, this is an asset whose time has come. I want to dedicate a lot of my time to analyzing and researching this market, because I figured if I can figure out how to read the tape on this thing now, then 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, I'll have a very huge informational edge as this thing continues to monetize. And it's kind of where we are now. So I began incorporating on-chain into my framework, incorporating mining into my framework, all these Bitcoin native factors into my analysis framework. And I started publishing my research independently on Twitter. I was kind of, shouting into the void. I had gained a few hundred followers. And then around April or May of 2021, or 2022 rather. So fast forward, this is about a year. I had done another year of the painting company. This time I had expanded it all across the state of Massachusetts. Now I wasn't managing just painters. I was managing teams of managers who were managing painters. It was very fun, but it was very stressful. About halfway through the summer, half my team quit on me. That was not very fun. So I was looking at doing about $500,000 in total revenue across all 5 of my team members. 3 of them quit. Not very fun. I ended up rounding out the year with really 2 rock solid managers, and I did about $250,000 in total revenue. And I took home basically the exact same amount that I did the previous year in profit for myself. And so, I'm still doing my thing. Now I'm doing a remote year. So I'm completely, I was completely at home that entire year. I go back for my final year, which was my junior year, get an apartment, a couple of roommates, and I'm still doing my thing. At this point, I've dropped the painting thing entirely, and now I really want to break into the markets research space, see if I could find a job in Bitcoin by analyzing Bitcoin in global markets. And several months go by. Around April or May of 2022, at this point, a mutual friend, Matt Snow, who is connected with Tyler, reached out to me, and he came to me with this job offer that Nick Bhatia was looking for. Obviously, the author of Layered Money, right? Inimitable Bitcoin global macro researcher. He came to me. He was looking for Matt Snow came to me and said that Nick was looking for a research analyst for the Bitcoin layer, which at the time was Nick's extension of Layered Money. Rather than writing a sequel to Layered Money, he figured it'd be best to create a Bitcoin and macro publication that tracks markets in real time. He was looking for a research analyst for that. And so Nick and I had a call. I went into one of the breakout rooms at the Calkin building at the Grossman School of Business up at UVM. We had a call, hit it off right away. It was excellent. I came on board, helped him out with the slide deck that he was presenting to people. I can't remember exactly who they were. He loved it. He loved the Bitcoin native base that I had. He decided to bring me on board. And so over the last 2.5 years, I started working with Nick in May of 2022, 2 years and some change. Nick and I have been working to build out the Bitcoin layer from, this publication that had 4,000 or 5,000 Substack subscribers to one that is now approaching 20,000 Substack subscribers, several hundred posts now behind us. We have a whole suite of different Bitcoin and global macro research products. We now have a YouTube channel that we began at that time that went from 0 to now 20,000 subscribers as well. And now we've gone from kind of a hobbyist macro publication, Bitcoin and global macro publication, to a Bitcoin and global macro research firm that serves not just retail customers, but also high net worth individuals and some asset managers too. And it's been one heck of a ride. And so I've been extremely blessed to be working with Nick over this period in building out this company. And so, yeah, that's kind of my experience up to this point. And then in January as well, I was contacted by Martel Fox from Layer 4 Talent. About Q4 of last year, we discussed the possibility of me coming on board with Theya to build out a research publication, also help them out from a growth standpoint. And Theya is the world's simplest Bitcoin multi-sig solution. It's really an aha moment when people open it up and you can set up a multi-sig vault from your iPhone in less time than it takes to set up a hardware wallet that's single key on your own. It really is amazing. So when I used the product, I was immediately on board, right? I understood the value proposition of this thing right away. And I know that in order for Bitcoin to monetize to what it inevitably will be, this 10 trillion, 20 trillion, $50 trillion asset, it's going to need these on-ramps that are simple and easy to use so people can use Bitcoin the way it was supposed to, instead of just buying it via an ETF. So that is the team that I've been working with since January. And my role since then has increased from just doing this Bitcoin and global macro research once or twice a week to now doing it twice a week, starting up a podcast to talk to other people in the self-custody space, other thought leaders there, as well as filming demos and really heading up the whole growth side of that operation. So that's what I've been doing over the last kind of 2 years and some change. My role in Bitcoin has certainly increased since the beginning of this year. And I couldn't be more grateful for it, honest and truly, right? It definitely was a leap of faith going into something as new and nascent and kind of out there as Bitcoin. The traditional path that people would take following business school, obviously, is to probably go get their master's or begin working at a bank or doing something, right? Doing something involved in a company that's already established and kind of working your way up through the years. And so for me to kind of take this independent approach, obviously I used case studies like Dylan and Will to show, as proof positive that this thing was possible, but then actually going out and doing it, it certainly has been a leap of faith. Flying blind for the most part, and basically just leaning on what I can do, which is breaking down Bitcoin and global markets in a simple and digestible way, and explaining the why Bitcoin question in 1,000 different ways to as many people as I possibly can to get them on board. That's kind of the value that I bring to the companies that I work with.
It's amazing, not only the work that you do at such a young age, but your ability to communicate the work that you do in such a succinct, accurate, digestible way. Like, as much as you spoke in the last 10 minutes, I absorbed everything. And you're I didn't learn how to speak until I was about 30 years old. It's like that didn't come to me right away. I guess I have some other questions, but where did you learn to communicate the way you do? Because it's very different than the average 23-year-old.
Absolutely. Well, I'll say by the grace of God, right? Jesus Christ, he blessed me with this ability, right? And so I think that, in hindsight, prior to really coming into my faith, I was a Christian my entire life, but prior to really coming into my faith, I made this realization. Obviously, I told you that I want to switch from medicine into business because I want to do something where I can talk for a living. I love talking. I always have loved talking. And the ability to talk succinctly, and I still use plenty of filler words, right? But talk succinctly and communicate ideas. I guess that's always been with me to some extent. But a few things that really helped were during high school, there was a business club called DECA. It used to have an acronym, Distributed Education Clubs of America, but now it's just DECA. They dropped the acronym. Basically, it's a business case competition club where you're given some kind of prompt, some kind of problem in any given industry, whether it's like, it's retail, it's communications, it's food and beverage, whatever it is. You're given 30 minutes to come up with a solution and then 10 minutes to go in front of a judge and present your solution. And having no business acumen at the time when I joined this club as a freshman, or actually as a sophomore, this really, it kind of taught me, it showed me that I had this ability, and so it was something that I wanted to run with. And so, I can only thank Christ for the ability and for finding out that I had that in high school, and then really just leaning into it and nurturing it rather than suppressing it and going on a route that certainly could pay more, right? Medicine, obviously there's more schooling involved, but it's a certainty. That my comfortability in jumping into uncertainty, right? Speaking for a living, communicating ideas for a living, that really has been a leap of faith. And I figured that out in high school, how kind of this skill that I had, and I've been leveraging it to this point, in the opportunities that I've been given.
Amazing. And so and then you also mentioned, of course, you went to school with Dylan LeClaire, novel information to me. And then, of course, you gave an honorable mention to the famous Will Clement, who kind of went down the Ethereum path. To each his own. Go make your money. But all of you guys when you guys became Twitter famous, Bitcoin Twitter famous, you guys weren't even of legal drinking age. And it's very, when I got into Bitcoin, I got into Bitcoin 2020, but I turned on Bitcoin Twitter, and that world opened up in around 21 as well, early 21. And I see people like you, like the other two. And I was like shocked, like Bitcoin, this big giant global asset, and it's being navigated by these LeBron James, Kobe Bryant's equivalent in this world. And it's like, you don't see that in traditional finance. You don't see that in other business industries. What is that novelty of Bitcoin that enables brilliant minds like you guys to not only succeed, because there are other people that succeed at, there's another 25-year-old that has a painting business somewhere that does great work, that brings in good revenue, but to be successful and to be publicly renowned for it is very unique. What's your thoughts on that? Like all three of you, all around the same time.
I think it just boils down to the magnitude of the issue that we're facing and the reality of it, right? A lot of, in the modern era, men especially, they've grown like very hyper effeminate. They don't want to come to terms with reality. But I think now more than ever, we owe it to ourselves, but also our children and our grandchildren. Like the problem that we're faced with, and I think this is probably the realization that Dylan, Will, and I came to when we were all in business school, or our undergrad degrees in business, is that when we're learning these things about Keynesian economics and aggregate spending, and that there needs to be a central bank at the head of it all in order to manage it, all three of us, I think, we're naturally endowed with this level of skepticism that a lot of modern men simply don't have, right? They kind of take what's fed to them at face value. They listen to it and they follow it like good little sheep, I'll say, I guess. And so I'm very grateful that with the problem we're facing and kind of the reality of Bitcoin, both of these things kind of came around at the perfect time for all three of us. And even as well, I'll say Joe Burnett, the current senior marketing manager over at Unchained, he too, he's 24, 25. This came to him.
I didn't know.
Wow. This came around to him when he was, in college, and then he completed his master's as well. He got involved. And so really all four of us, I think COVID also played a massive role in it, right? We were kind of Bitcoin curious At least they were. I wasn't just yet Bitcoin curious leading into COVID. And then that really cemented their beliefs that, okay, this is an asset that the world needs. And right now, given that we haven't grown up in an era, this is the era that we've grown up in. We grew up, seeing the great financial crisis play out and seeing what the Federal Reserve did in the wake of that, seeing the devastation that it's caused and kind of this silent depression of sorts. Nominally, and in real terms for the most part, the United States has not been in recession, but people's quality of life has diminished substantially. And we've been able to see that over the course of our early teen years and our teen years and into our 20s. And so I think all of that, then going into business school, learning about economics as it's taught to us and being skeptical about the way these things work, then Bitcoin coming around and monetizing at the same time, and COVID hitting all at once. I think it's just this perfect confluence of factors that all hit. And the kind of people that that Dylan, that Will, that Joe, and myself are, it really just came at the perfect time for us to position ourselves as young players in this industry, young industry professionals who understand the problem intimately because it's all that we've lived through. And then because we're young, because we have all this growth ahead of us, be able to position ourselves to learn about this asset and explain it effectively to the masses who, of older people and people our age as well, and generations to come who may not understand it yet. So, kind of a mouthful of an answer, but really just, the way I'd sum it up is just timing. It's all perfect timing.
Yeah, it's amazing, that timing. And I can harken back to when I was in business school. I graduated in 17, and I can just remember the status that I was. I mean, I accepted the economic theory that I was being taught. I was accepting the authoritarian technological use cases that we were discussing. And I think it was a combination of the COVID time frame really hit me hard. I basically discovered Bitcoin the same time as Michael Saylor, like the same month. And I had been building up these tenets of what it means to be free, what it means to have life, liberty, property rights in a kind of a disheveled, disorganized way, bringing my, hearing from my father, at the same time. And then Bitcoin comes around, and I never looked back. So it's just funny, the timing that you talk about, and me having to build up that skepticism because I was older, because during my formative years, life didn't hit me the way it hit you for. And shout out to Joe Burnett. I'm sorry I forgot him. I see his podcast all the time. Very well thought out. You guys are the Mount Rushmore of young Bitcoin professionals for decades to come. So before we get into more Bitcoin conversation, you're repping your Misfits Lifting Club. That's your lifting clothing brand, and I got my shorts on the way. They got lost in the mail somewhere, and I bought a pair for myself and my two little brothers. But you're also a soccer player. I think I just want to take shots at other athletes. Me being a basketball player, people say, "Oh, basketball is the best sport to be a part of." The stop and go, the balanced athleticism. Soccer players, I kind of feel like if they were to get in the fight, they would do a flying drop kick rather than give a couple of hooks and crosses. You guys don't have any arms, but then Joe Consorti comes around and he's doing incline press with two plates on each side, 225. So where did the bodybuilding soccer player hybrid come from? I'm so curious.
Thank you very much. Really kind words. And also, I made sure to add a signature requirement on this delivery, so you'll have to sign for it so no one can steal it or it won't get lost in the mail. But yeah, so it came from basically, I was very husky, I was very heavy set, and so I wasn't very fast. I played striker, and so I really kind of sat up on the top line. I could sprint pretty well, and I was bigger than most defenders. And so what I would do is I would sit on the last defender, wait for through balls, and then go in and score goals. And so, being a really heavy set guy, I couldn't play midfield when we needed a midi. There were, always, at least one, if not three other strikers as well. And so I did my fair bit of bench riding. I was okay. We were on the best club team in New England at the time, New England Rush. I'm not sure if they still are, but I was on the best team in New England. And so it just came down to, like, I was very heavy set. I wasn't, so therefore I kind of had forfeited a lot of the ability that can come from being like a, a light soccer player type guy. But I played it all throughout high school and I loved it. But about in 8th grade, and I played soccer all throughout middle school, elementary, high school, but about in 8th grade, I decided to take up bodybuilding right around like 2014, 2015 timeframe. There was nobody, not really anybody doing it. Gymshark was still like a 2 or 3 year old company. There was no such thing as an influencer. Really, it was like Athlete X and Six Pack Shortcuts, like 2 YouTube channels doing this thing. And so I really had to find my way doing that. And I fell in love with it as an individual sport, more so than I did soccer. I love my team. I love the guys that I played with, but I was just too big and too heavy for it. And so I decided to take up bodybuilding. And, it turns out that I take much better to that. My build takes much better to that than it does for soccer. So that's kind of how that came about, right? The bodybuilder, the soccer player transitioned into a bodybuilder. And then as far as Misfits Lifting Club goes, that kind of came last year. In July, I realized that I've been wearing a certain type of shorts for my entire life, not my entire life, since about middle school. They're literally just my middle school gym shorts that I cut a certain way. And I couldn't find any shorts that I particularly liked out on the market. And so I made my own based on the way I'd been cutting them since middle school. And, it's called Misfits Lifting Club, but really it's athletic apparel for anybody. I wear these shorts. I'm wearing the shorts now. The biggest test of whether or not you've created good clothing is if it's something that you immediately pick up once you see it in your closet, right? If it's the first thing you wear, once a load of laundry is done, you know that you've made good clothes. And with these shorts, I can confidently say that that's what I've made. So that's the reason, one of the reasons I made the company. The other reason I made the company is because I realized that a lot of the world's best athletes and the world's best thinkers and innovators, they're misfits, right? They lean into the kind of edgier aspects of themselves. They don't shave off their edges in order to fit into a round hole, right? They're all square pegs that don't fit into round holes. And instead of trying to make themselves fit, they intentionally lean into those differences, right? If we're talking about someone like Mike Tyson, right? Multiple time felon, in and out of jail, total psychopath, right? One of the best boxers of his time. John Daly, alcoholic, smokes 2 packs while he's going through the course, probably, if that's even possible. Doesn't drink water because it tastes bad, drinks Diet Coke instead, and eats a pack of M&Ms, but he still smokes pro golfers. He still has he's won multiple major championships. Same thing with Tiger Woods to a lesser extent. People like John Jones, right? One of the best mixed martial artists of all time. Extremely rough history, right? Extremely rough history, and he hasn't changed. None of these guys changed in order to become great. Even people like Steve Jobs, right? If we're moving away from athletics, none of these guys changed to become great. They were able to build a career around their identity, right? They became good because they leaned into what they were good at, right? And that's the misfits mentality. Basically, each of these guys had a misfits mentality, right? And so that's kind of where the idea for the brand came from. And then I incorporated it with lifting clothes because I did bodybuilding and I really wanted to create shorts that I liked wearing while I was lifting and wanted to see if people liked wearing them too. And thankfully people have liked wearing them. It's been a fun side gig over the last year. And, that's kind of how it's staying for now. Maybe one day, God willing, it'll be my main thing. But currently that's how we're rocking and rolling. I'm selling oversized t-shirts, 4-inch inseam shorts, and hats. All of them are totally custom tailored. I don't order blanks and then print my design onto them. Everything's custom from the ground up, which was a huge learning curve. I did have to order a lot of samples, which cost a lot of money because I'm not from the apparel space. But that's kind of how I went from soccer to bodybuilding to making this company that is now done. We're still at 5 figures in total revenue, but one day, very soon, hopefully we'll hit 6. And then even more beyond that, but it's fun.
It's amazing. I mean, you're literally a baby. It's like, and you have all of these endeavors, all of these ventures. It's humbling, and you're an inspiration to people many years older than you. And it's funny, the Misfits, as soon as I saw your brand on Instagram, I was like, yeah, that's what Bitcoin is. And so you can even see the cross section of like people who really lean into the Austrian economics, people who lean into the no, we don't actually need a central bank. Says only the crazy people in the world. If that clothing line is not in the closet of every Bitcoiner, then they're missing out. So I want to talk to you about something a little bit more ethereal. I've seen people equate Bitcoin in the past to a godlike entity, and you've already professed your faith in Christ, your Christian upbringing, your Christian beliefs. But I see these Bitcoiners, they almost encourage a type of worship. There's a thread that I found that shows all these retweets and all these tweets about how Bitcoin is this philosophical entity that should be heralded, to the point of I like to equate it to the golden calf and Exodus. But based on the tweets that you've put out, obviously you're not on that path. But I want you to tell me about the cross section of your moral and faith convictions with Bitcoin, and what are your thoughts on Bitcoin being more than that monetary network that is good, and people elevating Bitcoin to something beyond that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, when it comes to Christianity, right? Jesus Christ, the creator of the universe, right? The savior of all of our lives, right? He died. He lived the perfect sinless life to give us to kind of demonstrate to us the way that we should be living, right? He lived a perfect sinless life to set an example for us. And as human beings, right, we're naturally drawn to sin. Our flesh naturally draws us to sin. But the beautiful thing is that, repentance and turning to Christ and just expressing faith in him and believing in him, we're saved, right? We're saved. He died on the cross for us to absolve us of our sins, past, present, and future. And all we have to do is have our faith. My sort of Christian upbringing, I was in the Methodist church. They began preaching about things like gay marriage and all this other stuff, and having women as pastors, which you can't do. And so, I kind of left the Methodist church. I came back kind of into the faith around 2021, 2022, around the time COVID hit. And, now I'm in more of a non-denominational Bible-based church where we believed you're saved by grace alone through faith alone, rather than kind of works-based salvation. So like the Catholic Church teaches works-based salvation, my belief is that faith alone in Jesus Christ is how we're saved. And so as it pertains to Bitcoin, I think that obviously God created the universe that we live in. He also created all of the rules that underlie the universe that we live in. A lot of people will look at something like science and engineering and technology and mathematics, and they'll say that, that's sacrilegious. This is all silly. This is nonsense. Gravity doesn't exist. I think that's the extreme. But the reality of the situation is that God created all the rules that govern the universe. Science is just one of the lenses through which we can observe his beautiful creation. So is mathematics. Mathematics are perfect. Right? Math is perfect. It's this beautiful vehicle. It's so beautiful, in fact, that it's divine, right? Math in and of itself is divine. And so I think Bitcoin is an extension. It's mathematics personified, right? It is this beautiful divine creation. It's mathematics kind of brought into one of its most perfect forms that's ever been created. So I think that people worshiping Bitcoin as a religion, that's sacrilegious. People saying that Bitcoin is God or is a God, that's sacrilegious. But the reality of the situation is that Christ created the rules around which this universe is governed, right? Science is a lens through which we observe that, and so too is mathematics. And so Bitcoin is, through being basically just this convergence of mathematics, science, decades worth of cryptography, into this beautiful asset that was created and launched on January 3rd, 2009. I do think that it is the closest approximation to. I think it is the best money we've ever had. I think it's perfect money, frankly. And so I understand why a lot of people will look at Bitcoin and begin worshiping it like a god. But I think that people need to understand that rather than worshiping Bitcoin like a god, understand that just like science and mathematics, came from God, so too did Bitcoin as well, right? You know, the film Thank God for Bitcoin, obviously produced by SWAN, I believe. I haven't watched it myself, but ultimately, if you look at entities like the Federal Reserve and you look at them as like the epicenter of corruption, wanting to you know, dampen human flourishing by manipulating interest rates and making our lives worse so that theirs can be better, Bitcoin, in a way, you know, it allows people to opt out from that. And so I understand how people can look at Bitcoin like a savior, right? But we only have one savior, that's Jesus Christ, and he was merciful enough to offer us a way out of this solution, to put the people on the planet that over several decades, you know, over several centuries, right, were able to create the conditions around which Bitcoin could be created, right? And so rather than worshiping Bitcoin, I think we should be worshiping God for putting the people on this planet and creating the rule set to govern this planet that allowed for the creation of Bitcoin, which is this perfect money that allows people to opt out from this very evil, corrupt global central banking cartel that seeks to rob us of our prosperity, of our individual sovereignty. So I think that's kind of, that is the way that I view Bitcoin, right? And I've called out people, you know, on Twitter for this. I won't name names, but a very large Bitcoin influencer, huge following. He said something that's, you know, extremely dangerous, and because of how large his following is, and, you know, he said all religions go to zero, something like that, right, by Bitcoin. And so, you know, I looked at that and I said, this is blasphemous. Repent and believe the gospel. You know, I have my own beliefs. I'm set in my ways, and, you know, my mission here on earth, my job isn't what I do, you know, to earn money. My job is to save as many people as I can, right? To live a life in very close approximation to Christ. Obviously, will never shape up to being like him, but the best thing we can do is to follow him and follow his word and his teachings. And so that is how I view Bitcoin within the context of Christianity.
It's amazing the scope of wisdom, again, that you have at such a young age. You know, while I grew up Christian my whole life, never had to leave my church. I've only been in 2 churches my whole life: Orthodox, Presbyterian, where I go for the last 10 years. The ability to summarize why you believe in your early 20s is definitely a blessing. And I will say that people tend to worship creation rather than the creator, and they've done it for years, whether the Aztecs and the sun, the Greeks, and all of their pantheon represented by different elements in the world. And we just need to stay humble and find the creator. Stay humble and find the God that loves you, that created you, and hopefully all come to saving repentance one day.
Yeah. I love the way that you put that, by the way. Worship the creator rather than the creation, because we can get caught up in the material things of this world, but we're called to pick up our cross and follow him, right? And so, yeah, you know, you can't take these things with you to heaven. And so rather than venerating institutions, right, whether you're a Keynesian venerating the Federal Reserve, or you're a Bitcoiner worshiping the nodes and miners that make it all possible, and the developers that make it all possible, worship the guy that made it all happen.
Yeah, and then 2 more things. It's funny. I've always thought that fiat is our fiat currency is our current day Tower of Babel, if you will, or Tower of Babel, however you would say it. People have made this construct, and they make this like, look how great we are, in which they literally bend reality. This monetary energy, they can pull from the energy, add to the energy to essentially do their biddings the closer they are to the money printer, the Cantillon effect. And it's just like, you know, Bitcoin provides that counter position that most people wouldn't even be able to see if it weren't there. So literally, thank God for Bitcoin. Another thing, so I ran into you in Nashville at the conference. Didn't plan on meeting you, so it was like, again, a godsend to see you. We were already scheduled for the interview, but we met at Rock Toshi. It was my first Rock Toshi ever, and I saw Matt Snow on stage. While you're talking, I kind of put 2 and 2 together. It's like, okay, you guys are buddies. It was nice to see you supporting him. And it was fun. The young presence, the really like, let your hair down feeling of the event. It wasn't corporate as these conferences are evolving to. It just felt like the ultimate meetup. And there were so many people there that I knew, and running into Mike the shooter, what's her name? I forget her name. That works with Thea. You just mentioned her.
Martell Fox.
Martell Fox. Yeah, I saw her. So it was just fun to see all these different people. And we talked for about 15, 20 minutes. We talked about two major things. I wrote it down that night. And it was about the legitimacy of Bitcoin backing a fiat currency, and the effectiveness of world powers buying Bitcoin to prop up their economy. That was one. And then the philosophy of effective acceleration. And I want you to get into those 2 or 2.5 concepts, if you will. First, talk about the legitimacy of Bitcoin backing a fiat currency, because that was a major topic with the presidential election, with people hoping that their country adopts a Bitcoin standard. Talk about that, and then go into effective acceleration.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, the legitimacy of Bitcoin backing a fiat currency. I do think that rather than something, saying that Bitcoin will be backing the dollar 1-to-1, like Robert Kennedy earlier on in his campaign, probably at some point last year, had floated the idea of returning to something like the gold standard, backing the US dollar 1-to-1. And that just can't happen. That can't happen. Backing it with 1-to-1 with gold or Bitcoin or anything doesn't matter how transferable Bitcoin is, right? How many of those things that gold is good at, that Bitcoin is better at, right? We simply can't return to an era where the money we use to, transact and underlie the entire global financial system is a hard money. But what we can do is we can have countries and governments allocate to it in a reserve in order to kind of strengthen their currency at the margin and serve as an internal hedge for themselves, I believe, so that they're less incentivized to print away our savings, right? That's kind of the way that I view it. I don't think we can make a return to the pre-1971 order of having hard money underlie these world currencies. But I do think what is happening and what is going to happen, rather what is happening and what will happen at one point in the future, is that Bitcoin will be pristine collateral for global lending. And what that means is you'll be able to get the best interest rates if you have Bitcoin to post as collateral. The reason for that is because all the properties that gold is good at, Bitcoin is better at. Gold is relatively scarce. Bitcoin is absolutely scarce. U.S. Treasuries, while it is backed by the world's strongest military, and more importantly, it's not just backed by the military. The dollar is backed by how entrenched the dollar is. People will look to the U.S. dollar and they'll say, well, it's the military-industrial complex that is backing the dollar. That's why we're so globally entrenched. We're so globally entrenched because post-Bretton Woods, post-1945-46, all of the industrialization and all of the globalization that has occurred in global trade and finance has happened with the dollar at the base. And so it's not like a video game cartridge you can unplug and plug back in and replace with like a BRICS commodity-backed currency, whatever. It's more akin to the US dollar underlying the global financial system is more akin to building a skyscraper on top of the foundation. And with that example, it's absurd to say, well, let's do a foundation replacement for the World Trade Center. It's kind of several hundred feet into the ground, directly into the bedrock. You can't do a foundation replacement for the World Trade Center or the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building or any of these major skyscrapers, right? In the same way, you can't take the dollar out of global financial markets. You just can't. It underlies all of it. And the data backs that up. As a percentage of global FX reserves, the dollar has remained basically stable at around 50% for several decades. Granted, yes, it did decline from 70%, but I believe right now we're still at around 50%. And BRICS really hasn't even made a dent in that because of this reality that I just kind of explained. So I think Bitcoin for individuals gives obviously us a hedge against monetary debasement, which these governments are incentivized to do. But now I think governments are beginning to understand, okay, we can benefit from this too. We can have outsized gains on our balance sheet if we allocate a small portion of what we have to it as well. And so you have leaders of the free world now talking about allocating to Bitcoin. El Salvador has been doing it, but now you have the United States doing it. If the United States does establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve, when we were talking that night at Rock Toshi, it was only speculation that that's what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, the leading presidential candidate, it's now about 50-50 at the time, unfortunately. But Trump was 74% likely to win the nomination for president. And, he then went ahead 2 nights later and talked about establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so this thing is kicking off. Now, countries they're not working against us, they're working for us, right? There were memes going around last year of, people commenting under Larry Fink's post that mentioned Larry Fink when they were talking about the ETFs and saying, he works for me now. Bitcoiners saying he works for me now. Now, Bitcoiners can say the exact same thing about these countries who are working for them and not against them. They work for me now, right? Donald Trump, from a Bitcoin perspective, and if he is president again, he works for me now, right? He works for us now. And so that's kind of the way to think of it. I don't think that Bitcoin can back a fiat currency 1-to-1, like a dollar will be directly exchangeable for X amount of Bitcoin. But because that would throw a wrench into the global credit system, right? We need this elasticity of money the way things are currently, right? With this huge global debt-based regime, we need credit. And so, but I do think that Bitcoin serving as collateral underneath that credit, that's what's going to happen, right? We're still going to have fiat currency on top of it. In the current state of things, we need fiat currency on top of it. But serving as collateral right up there with U.S. Treasuries and gold, I think that's the role that Bitcoin is going to serve. It gives you that credit functionality on top of on top of all of it that allows global markets and global finance and global trade to go around, while you have Bitcoin as a collateral alternative right there with U.S. Treasuries, other sovereign bonds, and gold, and it beats those other 2 collateral options in every category. The second thing, I kind of almost answered, the effectiveness of a world power buying Bitcoin to prop up their economy. To prop up their economy, I think in some way it will be effective. Part of Senator Lummis's plan, who I interviewed on the Bitcoin Layer, we had the pleasure of doing the very first ever interview with Senator Lummis right after she released her Bitcoin bill. We actually received it early, which was awesome to be able to read that ahead of time. It's really cool. One of the reasons we're doing it is by proposing a 5% allocation to Bitcoin, we'll be able to pay off 50% of our national debt over a 20-year time frame, right? That is the proposal within the plan, is to keep all the Bitcoin reserves we have, purchase enough Bitcoin until we reach, I believe, 1 million Bitcoin acquired, hold it for a minimum time of 20 years. And then in that time, right, given historical appreciation, the bill basically outlines that by doing this, the goal is to cut our national debt in half. And that would be hugely, hugely helpful, because if we cut our national debt in half by spending less, the economy would completely collapse. I sent out a tweet yesterday about the federal deficit, and it said, we have a 5.5% federal deficit. It's projected at the end of the year to be 8.1% of GDP. That basically means if we did not continue running this deficit, the GDP would collapse, right? Jobs would be lost. Obviously, GDP isn't the best way to measure economic health, but GDP would collapse. We didn't start spending as much. And so instead of fixing the debt problem by spending less, which would crash the economy, fixing the debt problem by allocating to Bitcoin, letting it sit on your balance sheet and appreciate it, and then selling it to pay down the debt 20 years from now, right? That is a extremely effective way of paying down the debt without crashing the economy, given how reliant the U.S. economy is on structural deficits, on spending more than we take in. So as a solution to the debt problem, in that way, I think Bitcoin can, quote unquote, prop up the economy by making us, in the long run, less reliant on debt and helping us fix this debt problem without spending less, because spending less, austerity, would mean a multi-year, multi-decade recession, right? And then we don't even have the tax receipts to pay it off, right? And so maintaining our current level of spending, reducing it somewhat because there are plenty of things in the government that we can reduce, but the private sector is very reliant on spending from the government. It's just the way that it is. Fixing that rather than pulling back spending to fix that, which would cause a recession, allocating to Bitcoin, letting it appreciate, selling it off in 20 years in order to pay down the debt. That's a much more effective way of fixing this issue. So in that way, I think Bitcoin can be effective at propping up the economy per se. That's kind of how my thoughts have evolved since our initial conversation and since thinking about what Senator Lummis's bill proposed explicitly, using Bitcoin to pay down the debt. And then the third part of that conversation, the third part of our conversation, was effective accelerationism. Essentially, the idea behind effective accelerationism is that it's a philosophical and ideological movement originated in Silicon Valley. The whole idea of it is that technological advancements are accelerating, okay? And that's going to lead to hugely transformative societal changes, potentially solving massive, sweeping global challenges, right? Radically altering human life, right? The whole idea behind the EAC movement is that energy equals prosperity. And so the goal is to maximize our energy footprint rather than the kind of the regressionists, if you will, right? They're the regressionists and then the accelerationists. I'm not sure if regressionists is exactly what they're called. Maybe some Silicon Valley types will get upset at me for using this terminology incorrectly. But as far as I understand it, right, they're the regressionists, the Green New Deal types, the renewable energy types. We're going to use wind and solar and it's going to power the world, right? And we're going to destroy all of our farmland by doing it. And then cows have nothing to feed on. And then the cows that do feed on whatever soil we have are less nutritionally dense. And then we all become miserable and we're not, we're all nutritionally deficient. Then there are the accelerationists who say, look, let's leverage all the resources we've got. Let's use all available energy on the planet to maximize human flourishing. That's the accelerationist argument. And part of it is energy, part of it is technology. The two are interlinked, and Bitcoin being energy money, it's kind of the perfect currency to exist at the base of accelerating technological developments, right? If our energy footprint is expanding and energy efficiency is also accelerating, if computing efficiency is accelerating, which it is, right? Moore's law, computing efficiency every single 2 years, and you know more about this than I do, being an engineer. Computing efficiency is accelerating, energy efficiency is accelerating. And so rather than being afraid of this, let's accelerate this. Let's maximize our energy footprint. Let's maximize the advancement of technology so we can bring all of humanity up, right? Rather than taxing the rich and filling our farms with solar panels and filling our oceans with wind farms. That is a way of bringing everybody down, right? Bringing everybody on net down. How about we use the most dense, immediately transmutable, immediately transferable forms of energy, right? LNG, nuclear, etc. Let's accelerate the build out of those plants, right? So we can maximize our energy footprint, so we could lift up, human prosperity. We can maximize human prosperity. And that's kind of the idea of effective accelerationism. The other flip side of this, Sam Bankman-Fried, his whole thing was effective altruism, which was this whole idea of, I'm going to scam you, I'm going to make a bunch of money, and then I'm going to give it to people to build, a well in Kenya, right? And that's it, right? I'm going to give it to XYZ charity. That's a way of, rather than lifting everybody up, taking the money, siphoning a little bit of froth off the top, and then giving it to the people at the bottom, and then saving a little bit off the top and giving it to the people at the bottom. But what that does is, you're still here. This is the block of everything that you have. You're siphoning some off the top, giving it to the people at the bottom, right? That's effective altruism. Effective accelerationism is saying that, look, we are here. We have all of this energy. We have all of this mind power here as well, and all of this energy. Why not maximize our utilization of this? So instead of shifting the composition of the block of everything that we have here on Earth and human prosperity, shifting the composition of human prosperity, why don't we expand human prosperity on net? So instead of this, it's this, right? By leveraging all of our energy, right? So we can maximize our the physical and human capital we have here on Earth, build new physical capital, expand our per capita, right, human capital. And by doing that, expand human flourishing rather than shifting the composition of human flourishing, right? So that's kind of the idea of effective accelerationism versus something like effective altruism. And the whole idea is ascending the Kardashev scale, right, which is essentially a theoretical framework for measuring a nation or a civilization's technological advancement based on its energy consumption. Let's ascend that scale, right, rather than saying, let's shift up the composition because we're afraid of what may happen, right? God gave us this beautiful earth to tend to, right? He gave us all of these things for a reason, for us to figure it out and bring his kingdom here to earth. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could expand human flourishing rather than steal from the people, right? The rich, the people who are good capital allocators. Wouldn't it be better if instead of stealing from them and giving it to the less fortunate, wouldn't it be better if we could actually raise the baseline that people begin at by maximizing human flourishing, by maximizing our energy output with the natural resources endowed to us by our creator, right? And so fundamentally, to take a huge step back, it's optimism versus extreme pessimism, right? It's optimism about the future, right? And saying, look, we can do all these things. We can become a spacefaring civilization. We can drill everything that's underneath us, and we can build nuclear plants, and we could accelerate the technological development of humanity to bring humanity up, versus the pessimist argument that says, all of the industrial revolution we've experienced over the last 200 some odd years, let's regress and start taking our energy from extremely inefficient forms. And while we do that, let's tax the rich, right? So two fundamentally different schools of thought, one that's bullish on humanity and one that's bearish on humanity. So effective accelerationism is fundamentally the school of thought, the ideological and philosophical movement that's bullish on humanity. And I don't know a currency that is a closer approximation to how humans actually work and operate and is better for humans than Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin being an energy currency, right? It falls directly in line with the effective accelerationism movement. If we're going to bring up human flourishing and human prosperity, not only do we have to maximize our energy output to bring up individual human flourishing, but we need a currency that can effectively capture all those gains, right? We need a currency that can effectively capture all those gains from this techno capital complex that's making humans' lives better. If we're storing all that in fiat, all those gains are lost, right? And then we can't take those gains and reinvest those gains and bring up human flourishing even more. Bitcoin existing at the core of the EAC movement, right, will make it so that we can effectively capture all of the gains from here in a currency that's absolutely scarce. It doesn't matter, if we do all this and we bring up technological advancement and we raise human flourishing, it doesn't matter if we capture it in fiat currency that could just be printed away. But if we can capture all that those gains in Bitcoin, all right, then that really is what's going to change the world. And so that's kind of how Bitcoin fits into effective accelerationism. That's what effective accelerationism is. And this was actually introduced to me, the concept of combining Bitcoin and effective accelerationism. This was really headed up by Smeet Bot, one of the three co-founders of Theya. He wrote a really excellent post on this on his Twitter. His Twitter is Smeet_bot, if I'm not mistaken. So everyone should go check that out, read his pin tweet, and kind of understand it, because it is a school of thought for advancing humanity that is directly in line with Bitcoin's core values. So that's kind of my very long-winded explanation on all of that.
Brilliant. And, before I lose it, because there's so much to unpack there, the effective acceleration movement without Bitcoin is kind of sad. When you think about, we're going to, and you mentioned it a little bit, we're going to leverage all the energy of the world and build up our civilization. And I think the Kardashev scale even talks about how much a planet can capture its own energy. And then, like, 1 means you capture all the energy of your planet, and then 2, you capture all the energy of your solar system, and then 3, you capture all the energy in your galaxy, essentially. And of course, those are very theoretical. Right now, we're trying to work on 1 as we are as a civilization. But the catch is, like, the effective acceleration without Bitcoin, that net gain is lost because of fiat. But I will say, even more so, effective acceleration without Bitcoin is almost a form of effective altruism, because someone, when it's lost, it's going to someone's pockets, and it's lost in the hands of essentially the Cantillon effect. And it's really sad to think that even the people who are effective altruism or anti-effective acceleration, that they're so bent on the status quo, because they're essentially not producers. They're not value creators. They are proof of stake entities that say, we have gained this power in this modern day construct. If it ain't broke, why fix it? They are they have this siphon for everyone that's building, and they're basically taxing people overtly and subvertively. And only Bitcoin can really fix that. As long as when Bitcoin's not in the world, fiat owners essentially have rights and a stake to everything that you, I, or anyone watching produces. And Bitcoin brings that value, authority, that property rights back to the value creators. It's a beautiful thing. I do want to ask you one more question. Did you want to follow up on that at all?
No, I think your explanation was excellent, right? Without Bitcoin, effective accelerationism is basically just effective altruism on steroids, right? Then the central bankers, the people who conduct monetary and fiscal policy can say, all right, thank you for your technological gains. We have more to steal now, right? Whereas if Bitcoin is a currency that underlies all of that, and the effective accelerationists say, look, I'm going to store my value in Bitcoin, right? Then all of a sudden, the net gains to humanity can really be captured. So you said it perfectly.
Yes, sir. So again, this is the last question of the interview. I want to talk about you and your experience with your short and potent career. You have effectively lived your whole professional life in the Bitcoin space. And a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Xers that get excited about Bitcoin. We want to find a way to work in Bitcoin. SWAN. I had the privilege of working with SWAN for 9 months. I remember when SWAN first came out, me and my buddy were saying, "Oh, this would be cool, like to work with them." I got a chance to make videos for 9 months with the SWAN label stamped up there. It was cool. Corey Clipston's in my phone talking to me about ideas. I'm emceeing his local conferences and meetups. And of course, it's over because of the SWAN. I call it the halving, but it was nice while it happened. I got to work in Bitcoin, didn't leave my main job. But now, there's a lot of people that say, I want to throw away my fiat job so I can go work in Bitcoin. And, I have this example where I played League of Legends for a long time, and I knew some people who worked at Riot Games. They didn't like the game, not nearly to the level that the consumer liked it. I know a lot of podcasters, influencers in Bitcoin, and they don't consume every single Bitcoin podcast. They consume enough to get their job done. So the passion is not as much there when it's your profession. My question to you is, what's your advice to someone, say 10 years older than yourself, who's established in their career, and they're catching this Bitcoin virus, this Bitcoin bug of passion, and they want to work in Bitcoin? What do you say to them?
I say, if you have dependents, if you have an established career and a wife and maybe even kids, it's going to be harder. But if it's something you're truly passionate about, you'll find a way to make it work, right? In the same way that, side hustles and side gigs are a thing. I started Misfits Lifting Club despite working at the Bitcoin Layer full time and now TBL and Theya full time. I'm still doing that. And the reason I'm doing it is because, I don't hate clothes. I love clothes. And I've kept that passion and that fire inside me. So I would say, if you really love it, you'll find a way to make it work. Find a way to make it fit into your time. Prioritize things like your health and your fitness and your sleep, because those are things that are often very undervalued by founders and by people who start companies. They really abandon their health and their fitness. All of a sudden, it makes it's so much more difficult to juggle 2 things or 3 things if your fitness and your health are on the back burner. So it's kind of counterintuitive when saying, hey, how can I effectively manage these 3 things? These 2 things. I have a job, I have a career, I have a wife and kids, but I also want to get into Bitcoin. Me saying, focus on your fitness. That's like adding a 3rd thing. Like, wait, no, what are you talking about? But I'm telling you, it'll expand your capacity. It'll expand your focus, your ability to juggle things and go from one thing to the other. You need to prioritize what you're eating, what you're putting in your body, and the amount of activity you're getting. So that's what I would say to those people. On the point of, when it's your profession, you lose your passion. There's absolutely some truth to that, of course. Certainly the fire does dim a little bit when it's all you're doing every single day, 24/7. But I think that's the importance of perspective, right? If I'm ever looking at what's in front of me and saying, oh my goodness, Bitcoin's price has been chopping around for 5 months. There's nothing to talk about. I could consider what I could very well be doing now, right? 90-hour weeks doing investment banking, working at Goldman Sachs, and then having to work as hard as I can. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired, with no notice and no severance pay, right? And there are two things I could be doing in my 20s. I could be doing investment banking right now with the skill set that I've acquired and the schooling that I've had, or I could be working every day to help grow Bitcoin companies. And so for me, it's just a matter of perspective and gratitude and being grateful, because, when you're working, right, that passion is initially what gets you into it. But once you get into it, it's about being grateful for what you have, right? That passion won't always be there, right? It's not going to always be there. Sometimes it'll be a flicker, and sometimes it's going to burst right back out into a flame. But the important thing is understanding what you could be doing and being grateful for what you are doing, right? So that's what I would say. And I think spending all of my professional career to this point in Bitcoin, and God willing, I get to spend the rest of my professional career, the rest of my days in Bitcoin. I certainly believe that I will, given where Bitcoin is headed as an asset. I think that I have a unique perspective on this, in that I have not ever worked anywhere else or on anything else apart from my high school and college jobs. I've never worked in any other major industry. And so I have a unique perspective on this, but whatever advice I can give to people 10 years older than me, that's what I would say. The passion's not going to always be there, but if it is really something you're passionate about right now, prioritize your health. That way you can prioritize your time, find a way to make it work. And then just know that with where Bitcoin is headed as an asset, the passion's not going to always be there, but you got to understand, be grateful for what you have, and work every single day to just provide as much value as you can. I have in my calendar, it's been, and this is the first time I'm saying this to anyone outside of my fiance, my parents. I have in my calendar this reminder that just sits at the top of my Google Calendar, and I've had it there for 2.5 years, ever since I started working at the Bitcoin Layer. And it says, provide value and have fun. That's it. Provide value is first, because if I prioritize having fun, then I'm not going to be providing value on net. But provide value and have fun. And that's really it. And with whatever, words of wisdom I can provide for career professionals, of which I don't think I have many, that's the adage that I would take away, right? Provide value and have fun, and also be grateful for what you have, grateful for what's in front of you, and just work earnestly every single day, even when the fire's not there, right? That's what the world's greatest athletes do. You're not always going to have that passion. How do you outwork the guy next to you when that fire dies? Because that fire will come again, right? It will come again. But just like market cycles, just like life, it all ebbs and flows. There are changes. It's something you're really passionate about, you'll stick with it, even in those times where you're less passionate about it.
It's amazing that what you concocted right there, that response, you could hear that at a good church where they talk about the passions of being in the Bible and the passions of being amongst the brethren. And that passion isn't always there. There's not always going to be a religious magical experience, if ever. And so having those fundamentals, the understanding the why you're there in the first place, which goes back to keeping your body in good shape. Why are you working in Bitcoin in the first place? To provide yourself life, liberty, happiness, peace. You can't have peace if your body is broken. Then you don't have peace. So you have to prioritize all these different things to make sure that you can pursue your higher levels of self-actualization. If you want to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to make sure you have those foundational blocks first. Again, every single question, I outlined about 5-6 questions for you today, Joe, and every single one of them renewed my vigor for the things that I do, expanded my understanding of how wise you are at such a young age, and really gives me bullishness for Bitcoin as in general. If people like you will Joe, and Dylan, if all of you guys are leading the way for your generation, there is no stopping Bitcoin from being relevant for decades to come. So I thank you for coming on my show. For the audience, I want you guys to make sure you check out the show notes for all the people that Joe recommends. And dude, just thank you for being here, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Of course, absolutely, Ulrich. Thanks for having me. This was one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done. So really good questions. I felt like we got to know each other very well. So looking forward to it sometime in the future again.
Thank you. So that was Joe. Again, I already gave my closing statements to him. There's nothing left to be said. He's a brilliant young analyst. You're definitely going to know about him for decades to come. He has a passion, and his passions are rooted in fundamentals of life, of faith, and of what Bitcoin is. It was a fun episode. I'm Sir Ulrich, like my father before me. Tune in next week when we have another brilliant Bitcoin guest.